Hello, Peanuts, and welcome to anyone who is new to my podcast or to this channel. Now, this podcast covers true crime cases that may not be suitable for young listeners. There may be graphic and violent content, so listener and viewer discretion is advised. Now, before I start this episode, guys, there are a couple of things that I've done in the last couple of days that I think that I want to share with you guys. First off, think I'm going to do a podcast episode on the Idaho college murders, just because there's so much out at the moment. I feel like I want to do an episode on it. Also, if you get a chance, go and listen to the podcast after Alison After Nexium. I've only listened so far to the first episode, but that's another episode I really want to do, all about Nexium. If I'm going to be perfectly honest, I didn't feel sorry for it at all at the moment, at least after the first episode. I definitely think there were some things that potentially led Alison down that pathway and all that kind of stuff. But at the moment, I'm finding personally that I'm actually not feeling very sympathetic towards her at all. I don't even know if I could be empathetic towards her at this stage. I think that's more to do with the case of what she did as a part of Nexium rather than her herself. I don't know, but definitely I think I want to do a podcast on her for sure, or at least Nexium in itself, right? Okay, so sorry about that, got sidetracked. Now, if you get a chance, before you even watch this episode, or if you want to watch this episode and then go and watch something, make sure you watch a documentary, Confessions from Death Row. It's all about my serial killer today, and it was actually really, really interesting. And I think that anyone who wants to know a little bit more, understand this serial killer and how grotesque he actually was, this documentary in itself is pretty incredible. Now, our serial killer today, though he's only been convicted of 6 murders, again, I think we're going to find that this man himself has potentially done a hell of a lot more. We've got another sort of, I would border him with Rodney Alcala, Ted Bundy, pretty awful as far as I'm concerned. And also another one that flew underneath that radar, hidden in plain sight, absolutely not caught until his 70s. So let's get started like we always do. My serial killer today is Joseph Naso. My state today is Nevada. Now, whilst he is in San Quentin and some of his murders all over the shop, guys, but I picked Nevada because you'll find out why I picked Nevada. But if you get a chance as well, Nevada's another one of the most fabulous states. Get a chance to go through there. It's really, really incredible. Another trip with my mum. So I really thank you, Mum. Everything that I sort of like, it's so funny. I talk about these episodes and it just brings back a lot of memories with my mum, road trips. But if anything, I remember Tom Petty, Mum. Tom Petty, that and Roy Orbison. That we play that when we're in the car a lot. So let's get started, guys. So Joseph Naso, he was born in Rochester, New York in 1934. His childhood wasn't marked by a lot of privilege. In fact, it was he experienced a lot of poverty. He grew up in a modest working class household during the tail end of the Depression, a time where at the time money was really tight and opportunities were definitely very scarce. His parents were strict and deeply traditional. Discipline in that household was very harsh. There wasn't a lot of warmth. There wasn't a lot of affection. And Joseph learned pretty early on that it was considered emotions were a weakness. Some accounts do suggest that his father was domineering while his mother was really distant, creating an environment where control and secrecy sort of became a second nature to him. He's known as a boy to actually be quiet and very withdrawn. He didn't play any sports, or he didn't join any clubs. Instead, he would spend hours alone sketching and later taking up photography. Teachers described him as intelligent but socially awkward. He had trouble forming friendships, and when he did, those relationships were quite often short-lived. By his teenage years, Joseph's fascination with photography had grown. At first, it seemed really harmless, a creative outlet, but then even then, his subjects were mostly women. He liked to capture them in vulnerable poses, sometimes without their knowledge. It was a red flag, though, that no one really noticed. So after high school, he actually served in the military. The structure gave him a sense of purpose, but also sort of reinforced that sense of that he was superior to everybody else. And when he returned home, he carried that mindset with him and a belief that he could outsmart anyone. And he did for quite some time. That arrogance, though, would end up becoming a cornerstone of his crimes. But by that time, he'd sort of settled back into civilian life. He perfected that art of really blending in. He worked as a freelance photographer. He moved from place to place, and he kept his secrets buried very deep. To the world, he was known as Crazy Joe, just a quirky guy with a camera, but behind closed doors, he's an absolute predator, and it's all just taking shape and form. His crimes weren't just brutal, though, guys. They were chillingly organized. His victims were women. It was often women who were vulnerable and living on the margins of society. Again, we're going to see that many of them were sex workers or they were struggling with addiction of some sort. They trusted him because he had that sort of harmless nature, just an older man with a camera offering a ride or potentially a modeling opportunity. And investigators would later discover something that made him far more infamous. It's a pattern. Most of the women, though, had first and last names starting with the same letter. So we've got Carmen Colin, Pamela Parsons, Tracy Tufoya, and Roxanne Rogajash. This just became known as the alphabet murders, but there is a potentially, so before I continue, guys, there is also an unsolved murders of alphabet murders. So not to get confused. So I'm going to potentially call this more the double initials murderer, just because there is unsolved crimes that are affiliated with the alphabet murders. It could be that they're all tied together. We don't really, there's a lot that's sort of unknown at this stage. In his home during a police search, they actually found journals, pages with lists of women, notes about encounters, and very sort of cryptic comments. One entry sort of read like a shopping list: girl in Reno, girl in Sacramento. It's cold, it's methodical. And even though he wrote about his fantasies, he would often turn those into plans and execute them. Now, they're not just impulsive acts though, guys. He stalked his victims. He photographed them, sometimes alive, sometimes during the murder themselves, and even after death. He'd keep souvenirs, which happened to be those pictures. He also kept personal items, trophies of what he had done. And he did it for decades. And he'd move from state to state and he'd leave behind a lot of questions and bodies. Imagine this, though. A man in his 70s living quietly in California, carrying the weight of 4 murders, because at the time, potentially more, but no one had suspected a thing. Each victim has a story, though. So Carmen Colin, she's 22 years old. She'd lived a really tough life. She's struggling to make ends sort of meet. On the day that she vanished, she was seen leaving a store and then just nothing. And her body was discarded like it was trash. Pamela Parsons was a young mother. She's 38. She's trying to rebuild her life. She dreamed of modeling. And when Joseph Naso offered her a chance at this, she believed him, and that again cost her everything. Tracy was only 31. She had her own battles, but she's vibrant, she's hopeful. She disappeared after meeting Joseph, again under the guise of a photo shoot. And Roxanne, she's only 18 years old. She's barely even an adult. She was last seen in Fairfax, California. Now, her life had ended truly before it really began. There are at least 3 other confirmed victims. One of them was a 19-year-old by the name of Charlotte Cook. She was murdered in 1974. And in January 1981, the body of 56-year-old Shirley Patton was washed ashore near the Naval Depot in California. Now, at the time, she was a Bay Area resident seeking employment. He managed a property somewhere near where she'd previously lived and had taken a photograph of her. Although the police identified him as a prime suspect in 1981, it's his evasive responses during questioning meant that he was not charged for almost 3 decades. Sarah Dillon, she was born Renee Shapiro and later had adopted the name of Bob Dylan's former wife. She's a devoted fan, obviously, of Bob Dylan. She was last seen in May 1992 on her way to a Bob Dylan concert in San Francisco, and investigators believe that she was killed or at least near Nevada County. There's also the mystery of a Sonoma County Jane Doe So on January 24th, 1983, a gardener found a headless and a partly decomposed body of an adult woman near Foss Creek. That's near Healdsburg, California. Investigators later found her head during a search of the area. Decades later, in 2011, her remains were exhumed for DNA testing, but she still remains unidentified. And authorities have linked her to Joseph because of a chilling entry in his rape diary mentioning a girl in Healdsburg. And the connections, they really don't stop there. So Joseph was also a person of interest in an unsolved murder in Rochester, New York. 4 of his California victims were known to have double initials, just like one in Rochester. And Naso, he'd been a New York native, obviously, up until the early 1970s. Now, one of the victims was even named Carmen Collin, but that's the same victim's name. Now, they would actually clear him of that victim. His DNA didn't match. There was also another victim, Wanda Wolakowitz, and there's a lot of similarities, and true crime enthusiasts are sort of wondering, hang on, is it potentially him again? These women, though, they're not just names on the list. They're daughters, they're mothers, they're friends of people, and he just treated them like objects, possessions he could control and discard and catalogue. This isn't about rage for him, though. It's really about power. He's a man that wants to outsmart everyone, and he wants to make sure that everybody is aware that he's outsmarting them. So for decades, he's living in shadows. He's moving from state to state. He's a freelance photographer. He's seeming very harmless, a little bit eccentric, but definitely people didn't get that vibe of dangerous. That illusion, though, is shattered in 2010. It started with something really routine, a probation check. Now, he'd had a prior conviction for shoplifting. He liked to break into women's houses and steal lingerie. So it's upon this particular probation visit. So as part of it, when he's living in Nevada, the probation officer could smell alcohol on his breath, and he was really volatile at the time. He didn't want to let him in. And what they found in that house, they would discover boxes and boxes of women's photographs, hundreds of them. Some of them are posed, others a little bit more candid, and then came the journals. Dozens of handwritten notebooks filled with some pretty disgusting, chilling entries. They weren't diaries of thoughts and feelings, they were records. Lists of women, notes about the encounters, and the phrase it really chilled officers. They knew something wasn't completely right. There was one particular line, girl in Healdsburg. That's a single line that linked him to an unsolved murder, the Sonoma Jane Doe. It's not just a primary probation violation. It's really, really the start of a huge murder investigation. Detectives dug deeper. They found what he called it himself, his rape diary. It detailed all of his sexual assaults, his fantasies, his killings. Each of these entries, though, they're really methodical. They're really clinical. And then came the photographs, and some of those women would be actually later identified as his victims. Now, some of these photos, guys, the most appalling part of it was he took photos through all aspects of the murders. So he would, when they were unconscious, after the rapes, he's getting off on this. Now, we've seen this a couple of different times, right? We've seen it with Rodney Alcala. A lot. He liked to photograph women. He liked to make sure that, he was taking photos and he was exploiting them as much as he could. Joseph Naso, he's on a whole different ball game though, guys. I'm going to get into it in a little bit in his trial and stuff like that. But he's never admitted anything, but he seemed really smug. He seemed really, really arrogant. He was I would probably call him a Ted Bundy. I don't think that there was any way, shape, or form that he was a good person. The things he did and the things that are potentially going to come out about him and the list of victims, I think it's going to be a hell of a lot more than what we saw with Ted Bundy. Now, obviously, Rodney Alcala is the same way. There's heaps and heaps of photos of potential victims. Now, this could be just a catalogue of what he was thinking and what he wanted to do to victims. I don't know. This is all me just trying to understand what this is all about, right? So it's one of those things where I sort of I don't know if it's chalking up to he is writing it out as a fantasy and he's sort of changed it into a story about a person, but there's definitely got to be some components to this that are what I would think. And again, guys, this is just my opinion. These are just my thoughts. It's not based on anything. If I wanted to, I think I could do far more investigating and far more research into this, but there's not a lot available about him. Like, that documentary is really quite detailed, but you go and research all of these things. There's not a lot known about him. He's been married, he's got kids, his own family wants absolutely nothing to do with him. So it's really hard to sort of gauge without him. He doesn't even want to do interviews or anything like that. So you can't get a lot on him. It's DNA testing, though, that would actually seal his fate. Samples from crime scenes would actually link him to this. And that was those 4 women I've talked about before. It was Carmen, Pamela, Tracy, and Roxanne, all linked to him through forensic evidence and his own meticulous records. Investigators also realized that they were dealing with a man who'd been killing for decades, hiding in plain sight, a man who truly believed he's smarter than everybody else. And when he finally had to face justice, the trial's anything but ordinary. From the start, he made a shocking decision. He would represent himself. No defense attorney, no legal team, just himself standing before a jury arguing for his life. Now, according to him, he actually had studied law and he just genuinely believed he could outsmart the system again, guys. It was investigators and police had never sort of seen this type of arrogance. It's his journals, it's his meticulous planning. It's all coming out in court. You've laid it out in black and white, mate. Like, how did you think you were going to get away with this? He walked into the courtroom with a stack of papers and a smug confidence that just really stunned everybody in the courtroom. He spoke calmly, almost casually, nonchalantly. So it definitely came off like he was really arrogant. He questioned witnesses with a tone that bordered on condescending. At times, he even smiled. It was really a chilling reminder to a lot of the people in court that he was really a predator and it had a really good mask on for all these years. Prosecutors would present the evidence, though, DNA linking him to those murders, photographs of the victims, the infamous rape diary. They would read entries aloud, and those words would describe the women as objects, trophies. The jury really listened in silence, and it was just that it was painted a picture of a man who'd just been hunting women for decades. His defense, he claimed that the evidence was all circumstantial. He argued that the photos were part of his work as a photographer. He dismissed the journals as fantasies, not confessions. He even suggested that the DNA evidence had actually been flawed. None of the jury, fortunately, bought that at all. Throughout the trial, it was his arrogance that never really wavered, though. He would interrupt prosecutors. He lectured the judge on legal procedure. He even bragged about his own intelligence. And at one point, he told the jury, I'm not a monster. I'm a misunderstood man. Those words really, really hung, and it didn't sit well with absolutely anybody. In fact, it felt a lot like poison for a lot of people. In 2013, after weeks of testimony, he was actually convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder. The sentence, death. He was sent to San Quentin prison. He remains on death row at the moment. Even in his sentencing, he showed zero remorse, no apology, just the same cold arrogance. A man who believed he'd outsmarted everyone until the evidence spoke louder than the words. As the investigators dug deeper into his crimes, an unexpected voice emerged from behind the walls of San Quentin. Now, this is William Noguera. He's a convicted killer on death row. Now, he is not just he's not just inmate. He's a man who spent decades studying criminal behavior, psychology of killers. He's observing predators up close and personal. Now, William himself, before I continue, is a convicted murderer. So he got, as a teenager too. So I believe he got his girlfriend pregnant, and the mother of that girlfriend didn't want them to have the baby, and he killed her. So he's, to be fair, guys, he very likable. Watching that documentary, William, or Bill, he prefers to be called Bill, is actually very likable as a criminal, which is really hard to say, right, guys? So he ends up emailing an ex-cold case detective, and this is sort of where that documentary goes, because it shows that this cold case detective who is no longer in the police force. He goes and tries to find victims and tries to solve more murders. Anyway, that's the documentary itself. So Bill told authorities he fit the profile of a serial killer, of an organized serial killer. He described a man who thrives on control, someone who plans every detail, keeps trophies to relive those experiences. And according to him, Joseph's arrogance wasn't just the courtroom bravado, but it's a part of his DNA. Bill actually explained that killers like Joseph often document their crimes because they crave power after the act. So they want to relive it. They want to, and that's a lot of serial killers, guys, a roadmap of his violence. Now, Bill warned investigators that the so-called rape diary was more than just a sick hobby. It was evidence of a predator who wanted to immortalize his control. He even speculated that Joseph had more victims than anyone had actually realized. The lists in the notebooks, the cryptic entries like Girl in Hillsburg, suggested a pattern far beyond 4 murders that he was convicted of. Bill actually believed those journals were the key to uncovering a full scope of all of his crimes. Now, Noguera's insight added a chilling sort of layer to the case itself, a killer recognizing another killer. His words reinforced what detectives sort of had already suspected, that Joseph Naso wasn't a man who killed in the heat of passion. He was a predator who hunted, he planned, and he documented his crimes like trophies in a collection. Even behind bars, the echoes of violence speak very, very loudly. And when one murder looks at another and says, he's the real deal, you know you're staring into an abyss. So if you get a chance, go and watch that documentary, and it does talk about other victims and it does talk about potential other victims. I really enjoyed this episode, guys. Thank you so much for joining me on an episode of Crimes from the Peanut Gallery. If you found this story as chilling as I did, please subscribe, hit that like button, leave me a comment. Stay tuned for my next episode where I'm going to delve into another dark and twisted tale of a serial killer. Until then, stay safe, be vigilant, have a great weekend, my fellow peanuts. And also, leave me a comment if you want me to do a documentary or a podcast episode on Idaho college murders or NXIVM. Thanks so much, guys. See ya.